Qualcomm products, Qualcomm chips power the phones and the computers that are working overtime right now as the shelter-in-place orders and lockdowns are happening around the world. Give us a picture of how the outbreak, the situation right now, is impacting demand for Qualcomm products around the world.
Sure. Well, it's nice to talk with you. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. If I look at demand, I think everyone has been hit by, really an impact to the consumer while the virus has been peaking in individual countries. It's probably worked its way west, meaning that in China you've seen an improvement in terms of demand, and you've seen that in activations of phones, for example. I think everyone's trying to put their arms around as to how Western Europe and the U.S. is going to deal with this. But in terms of the operations of the company, the operations of the supply chain, I would say the ultimate end demand for the technologies that we work on, that still seems to be quite robust. We just have to consider how we get through this near-term period in terms of a dislocation in demand. But the technologies themselves and the operations of the companies, I think, continue to go quite well, actually, even given the difficulties of this environment.
Now, Steve, I know that there's still a lot of uncertainty here, but you have to be doing the math and looking forward and preparing for the worst-case scenario. What is your sort of operating assumption about just how much worse it gets for the overall economy, which is often an indication of demand in general?
Yeah, well, I'd say if you use China as a guide, it took about 5 weeks for their handset activations to resume to a more normal level. Now, I don't think anyone thinks that the issue worldwide is going to be any less severe than what we saw in China. But I think what happens with companies, particularly big tech companies, and we're certainly in this category, we're very much focused on making sure that we're positioned well coming out of these situations. So if you look at the technologies like 5G or the smartphones that people are using really to get by during this environment, we know that those are going to continue to be important to people. We know that maybe even more so given what the usage patterns that we've seen. So we want to make sure that we're prepared to take advantage of what we think will be a pretty significant uptick on the backside of this situation. So I think there's probably less work trying to figure out how long it's going to be, at least right now, and more to make sure that your organization continues to be strong during the downtick, at least in terms of demand. Now, for us, we continue to hire. We continue to add people in the areas that we're driving 5G, and that will continue, we think, through any length of time that we can envision in terms of the length of this situation. But we're probably in a little different situation than perhaps some other companies, just because we know that the technologies we're working on are going to continue to be important as we come out of it.
You sort of preempted my next question a little bit, but I want you to dig a little deeper in terms of what your operations are looking like in the midst of the lockdown. How much of the company is operating as compared to normal?
Sure. We went to work from home and essential personnel about a little bit over 2 weeks ago, and we're going to extend that and we did that worldwide. We're going to extend that in the United States until the end of April, consistent with the guidance that the president gave a few days ago. In China, it's there are different, I think, guidance given from the local governments, and we're in compliance with that. But what's happened is, even given the fact that the majority of our company, actually the vast majority of our company, is working from home, we're continuing to make progress because of all of the, we had already instrumented our labs so that you don't have to physically be in the lab to make a lot of progress. So we don't expect, nor do we see in the near term, any indicators that would suggest anything other than we are on track for 5G deliveries. We continue to tape out new chips. We continue to actually bring up new chips. And we continue to make progress on 5G. It's remarkable, actually. It's just a tremendous amount of bandwidth being used, delivered to the homes, primarily of our software engineers, to make sure that we make progress. We had, like every tech company last week, we had to figure out how to deal with the shutdown in India. We figured our way through that, and I think most people have. continues to do very well. Tremendous usage of data into the home and into mobile data to make sure we're successful. Tremendous amount of video conferencing, and I don't think the workplace is going to go back.
That's interesting. You wonder if some of these new productivity habits will carry over into a return to normal. Are you saying that the rollout for 5G won't be slowed down at all, or should we reset our expectations at all in terms of the timing of when we see that from you?
I think the short story is no one has a sense for how the consumer will react here in the near term. But the networks, the push for infrastructure, the desire from governments or by governments in order to push the technologies continues to be very, very strong. In fact, I think most governments are now trying to figure out, they're saying, hey, work from home, educate from home, telemedicine, these are all things that we need to be prepared to deliver at a much higher volume and across the entire population, across the entire socioeconomic spectrum. And how do we get that figured out? I expect to see those technologies worldwide being encouraged to be deployed in stimulus bills and things like that. I think that is definitely something that people have learned, at least we've certainly learned here in the United States, that we need to do a better job at doing. So I don't think you're going to see anything in terms of the deployment of these technologies, anything but moving forward at a fast speed. Then the question is, how long does it take for the consumer to be prepared to take advantage of that and get through this issue? And I think when they do, it's going to be they're going to want it in a big way.
Now, how is the supply chain holding up? Are there weak spots? Do you perceive or predict any weak spots ahead as the outbreak continues to spread? Obviously we've gone from China to Europe to the U.S. and perhaps even India as the next epicenter.
Supply chains held up reasonably well in the semiconductor space. I think particularly for us, we have less in China, so we had dealt with we avoided a number of the issues that maybe some other companies had seen. You had a little bit of trying to figure out how, particularly in California, how to deal with the shelter-in-place guidance that the governor gave. But most people, I think, have worked through those issues. So the supply chain, our supply chain and the supply chain of our customers is actually quite strong now and has been for some time. So that tends to be less of the issue, at least in our area. We had some issues. You have some issues every once in a while with delays because there just aren't as many commercial flights going on between different, particularly Asian countries. So you don't have as much opportunity to take advantage of logistical flow because the commercial flights are less. But by and large, people, I think, are working around the supply chain. Supply chains do not seem, at least in our industry, to be the issue.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about leadership during this crisis and what it's like for you as a CEO. Your concern for customers, your concern for your employees, and how you're sort of navigating that in terms of thinking about worst-case scenarios, preparing for long-term consequences. What do you see when you look ahead, and what keeps you up at night?
Sure. So as a manager, I think the first thing for everyone is just making sure that your employees and your customers and all of the folks in the communities that you live and work in are safe, which I think most people are doing, I think, a good job. For us, we've been also, because of the fact that we've done a lot of business continuity planning, so really we've had the infrastructure in place to allow us to deal with something like this. It's really about the operations of the equivalent of a physical plant, but it's actually making sure that your IT can handle the load and things like that. We spend a lot of time making sure that our balance sheet and we can sustain ourselves financially. We're in a stronger position perhaps than others, I know. So we spend time on that, and then you just have to stress to people: make as much progress as you can within. The priority is, of course, keep yourself safe, but make sure we're making as much progress as possible. We're using electronic video conferencing and it's just a tremendous amount of video calling and video meetings. In fact, I think it was any 24-hour period, more than 100% of the company is essentially on at any given time, meaning we have more active VPN connections than we have employees at a given time. So there's a tremendous amount of work being done, millions of Teams messages back and forth. And as I said before, I think that is the working mode that people are going to be in. And, just keeping people focused on the things that you can control and trying to deal with the fact that the things that you can't control, don't stress on them. But, it's an unusual time for people, me included, and we just have to get ourselves through it.
Well, appreciate you giving